Okay, I think we're ready, so we'll get cracking. So first off, good morning. I'm Stephen Knight. I'm the CEO of Pimento, and thank you for joining us for the 7th panel discussion of this year. As you know, we've changed the name of our panel sessions to Marketing Spice Live, part of the portfolio of content we are sharing across various channels with brand owners, agencies, consultants right across this year. For those that weren't on our previous Pimento calls, please use the chat box to ask questions or make comments. We want to make the session as interactive as possible, and we will aim to open it up for questions at 1:15. For those that are new to Pimento, Pimento is an agency network of around 165 agencies and consultants who in turn employ around 2,500 marketing professionals. And we've been offering over 90 different marketing disciplines to hundreds of clients for the last 18 years. So we're a virtual agency network that creates bespoke solutions for clients. Today's session is entitled Marketing Spice Live, Marketing in a Recession 2. And if you've already had your fill of negative polls and doomsters, don't worry, today is going to be a much more positive uptake despite the weather outside on the recession and the advantages that we can all make. Recession, I think, offers really major opportunities for innovators. This can be actually a good time to introduce game-changing offerings or simple, affordable solutions or make bold strategic moves. Resource scarcity that typically accommodates recessions forces innovators to do things that perhaps they should have been doing already, prune prudently, refeature to cut costs, master smart strategic experiments, and manage the risks of innovating by sharing them with others. And today we are joined by 4 panelists who together have been through 5 recessions each in their lives. On our panel, we have Tina Fegan. Tina, many of you will know her, but for those that don't, was one of the first to work in the marketing procurement sphere some 25 years ago. She established many of the first marketing procurement teams in the UK for the likes of Cellnet, Telefonica, GSK, Orange, and France Telecom. She went on to work agency side at Grey Advertising as their commercial director, followed by a stint at Lower House Spink, an experience that perhaps taught how agencies worked commercially, or at least how they used to work commercially in those days. In 2006, she set up Tina Fegan Consulting to offer marketing procurement consultancy services to brand owners, that's clients, and her clients included Adidas, the BBC, Halfords, KPMG, Money Supermarket, PepsiCo, SSE, Selfridges, Vodafone, and Waitrose, to name but a few. She's also been the chair at the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply, the CIPS, and together with her group of marketing professionals, procurement professionals, she's been chair since the inception in 2006. She also speaks globally around the world on the subject of marketing procurement, and she was the first marketing procurement person to ever appear in Campaign's annual A-list of the most powerful people in advertising. So welcome to you, and good to see you. Simon has over 30 years at Simon Oldfield, experience as a client-side marketing, sales, and general manager. He's worked in a number of categories, including construction, hotels, but predominantly in the automotive sector. He's held board-level positions at Mercedes-Benz UK and General Motors, as well as senior marketing roles at Hilton and BMW UK. He's a firm believer in the mantra that communication is everything and everything communicates, and that effective business needs alignment of their internal culture and external brand promise. Never more important than that. Adam Rubins has over 25 years of delivering digital-first strategic communications, both agency and client side, heading up email marketing at Disney Buena Vista, launching over 400 films, and then over 15 years running the award-winning global integrated communications agency Way to Blue. He sold Way to Blue in 2018, and now he runs his own consultancy called The Arc, which is dedicated to agency growth and M&A, and is taking more of a holistic approach than some of his competitors in that space, with a focus on people as well as the business. He's also a passionate well-being advocate and has interests in diversity and inclusion, and works with the Action for Children campaign. Cindy Yelda is founding partner at Leonardo Advisory and senior advisor on cultural organizational change, and she has 25 years boardroom level experience. Before even Peter Drucker famously stated that culture eats strategy for breakfast, Cindy was working with leaders who understood how a great culture could be translated into competitive advantage. So there you go. We have 4 senior, seasoned, shall I say, international marketeers who've got a different perspective and come from a slightly different point of view on this particular subject. So we should have a pretty robust conversation this morning. In the last session which we did, which was back in July, I promised you we'd do a follow-up to that because it was very well received. We explored similar themes, And you can actually listen to that session. It's available on our catch-up channel. All you have to do is go to YouTube and then type in Pimento Agency, and you can see that. We've also got a podcast, and we produced a white paper on the subject. So plenty of recessionary marketing information and collateral out there to support you. And as we go through today's talk, Teresa will be basically putting into the comments side various different references that you can copy and paste and look at later on, and articles that you can quote from. So it kind of looks like the recession is finally here, albeit that the flat line in the last 2 quarters, rather negative territory just yet. They may well have all changed in the last few weeks. As I said, I want to explore the more positive side of recession and think a little bit about what we can do to help our clients. And if your clients in this call, what your agencies can do to help you. For a lot of agency and client staff, for that matter, this will be probably the first time they faced a real recession. And the R word can, I think, put the fear of God into people. So I really want to try and, as I say, focus on the positive side, but equally to depoliticize this, because we are where we are. We've got to make the best of what we've got in front of us and see what we can do to thrive in this environment. So I'm going to start with a question, if I may, to Cindy and to Tina. We'll go to Cindy first. How do brands adapt to this new environment? How do they stay relevant, empathetic, helpful, and resilient? And still offer, I guess, value for money? We need to ask you to unmute, Cindy, sorry.
Sorry, apologies, schoolboy error. So I think the first risk actually for brands is not to retreat. There's a real risk actually that brands retreat, and therefore I think the key piece is to stay connected, and connected to their consumers. And I'd say connected to 3 things. I say consumers, stay connected to their cost base and their cash flow, and connected to their culture. Those are the 3 things that I think are fundamental for them to stay relevant. Connected, understand, and then adjust. So adjust what they're doing, and on a weekly basis they should be doing that. The other thing that won't surprise you for me to say, but a piece of research that came out of the last recession said that organizations that had open, transparent, and inclusive cultures outperformed their competitors by 40%. So actually, if organizations want to stay resilient and helpful and relevant, having a culture that is open, transparent, and involves the relevant people will keep them ahead. So those would be my starter for 10.
Okay, well, as a communications expert, that all makes a huge amount of sense. And I guess the issue that we all face now as post-COVID is that we still don't necessarily have everybody in the office, as it were. So I guess that internal comms, that sort of town hall type meeting you kind of referenced, becomes that much more difficult.
Yes, but I think it does become difficult, but actually it means that, and I don't like the word internal communication, sorry, but I think it's about connection. It's about staying connected, and therefore it needs to be much more intentional. So you can't rely on the water, cooler moments. So it needs to be structured, it needs to be habitual, and particularly going through the next, 3 to 6 months, it needs to be structured, and it needs to be, but also structured and personal. Yeah. And it puts much more responsibility on the leaders. So, one of my ex-clients, an unusual character, Martin Gilbert from Aberdeen Asset Management, he said, it's not internal communications, it's internal coaching. And I think that is going to be so relevant over the next 3 to 6 months. Is you can't delegate this stuff to a function. It needs to be owned by the managers and the leaders to stay connected to their people and take accountability for that. That's what, yeah, I think it's going to be.
Tina, do you have any builds or thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously mine's slightly different from Cindy because I'm coming from a procurement point of view, and obviously there was a study this week, marketing week, about that. Unfortunately, budgets will be cut. 2/3 of marketeers looking at budgets, and I know you want to be positive, Stephen, but I think it was about getting brands to actually think where they're spending their money. There was a really interesting article by Simon Wolfson at Next, and basically he was saying that we're going to look at our ROI, we're going to spend on a campaign by campaign basis. So for every £1 we invest in marketing, we expect a £1.50 return. So I think those brands need to focus on, they're going to focus on the consumers, And they have to remember that not all consumers are unfortunately going to be equal coming through the recession. Obviously, we do know that unfortunately the lower income households will be harder hit, and the wealthier ones perhaps won't be hit as much. So I think from a brand point of view, it's, and I would say this, you know, in working with your agencies, is being open, honest, flexible. I think flexibility for me is really key, and actually understanding that it's not one size that fits all. It's actually, and I think coming out of COVID, there's been great lessons. You know, I saw agencies and brands, some react really well, you know, brilliantly well, in it together. Let's be honest, how can we get through this? And I think in a funny way, will there be some lessons from the COVID and the ways of working with brands and their agencies that those that are brands and agencies on this call can take from that and say, right, okay, you know, with what we've got, let's be flexible, let's be transparent, but be adaptable, because I think there will be different messages depending on the audience. And also look at the ROI. So I do think channels like digital marketing, direct marketing, that are more, you know, easier to look at the return on investment will be on the increase as well. So I'd say to agencies, you know, to brands, to actually look at the channels that you are using, to adapt to the different target markets, how they're being impacted by the recession, and then dial up and dial down. Because someone Wilson at Next was saying, if stuff is working on a campaign by campaign basis, we will invest. So working, you know, brands working with the right agencies, should work together and maximize the value of the marketing budget.
Okay, so basically what you're saying there is it's all about partnerships, a little bit like Cindy, it's about communication, it's about actually, again, education, you know, talking to your clients and getting them to understand, to appreciate actually how the different channel mixes work together. And actually it's also being open and honest with each other and saying, look, you know, this is going to be tough, but actually if we work together, we can actually achieve really positive gains despite the marketplace. And
be flexible and invest in measurement as well, which a lot of brands don't do.
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it? Even these days, you know, accountability and so on. Adam, I mean, does there have to be budget cuts? I mean, I suppose building on what Tina said, it sounds like there will be, but what sort of arguments are best leveled at clients?
Well, I think first and foremost, we should recognise that this is a recession unlike any other. So we're seeing a number of market forces that are leading us into recession, but we feel very hopeful about coming out of that. And there are various growth strategies that have been put into play. But typically, the biggest macro issues for business during a recession are instability. So for those who are uncomfortable with change, this can be extremely unsettling. A reactive cost base. So we often build a cost center as a reaction to client or customer demand. When the demand dissipates, we're still left with that underlying cost base. So that is often what we look to address. And confidence, and with less confidence comes less risk. So that means innovation, learning, and progress can slow down. So in times like this, we need to focus on what we can control. Clearly, we can't control the economy, the government, or any of our customers. We have to focus on our strengths and use this time effectively to pivot the business or refocus the business on its core strengths. Often when the economy is doing well, we diversify and invest in a number of new opportunities. When times are harder, we need to explore how successful these investments have been and whether we need to refocus the core business or become more efficient. The issue is often at board level. Various stakeholders or shareholders who are perhaps not as operationally involved can influence the business by squarely focusing on the bottom line. So we need strong leadership, to Cindy's point, to stand against short-term thinking and profit protection.
Yeah, I mean, and leadership in good and bad times obviously is essential. It's something we come back to on these calls all the time. I'd like to, if I may, address a question to you, Simon. I mean, obviously, you spent the vast majority of your life client side working for both global brands and national brands. What would be your expectations of your agencies at this time? How would you expect or want them to respond?
Well, I think the thing not to do with your existing, relationships with clients is to try and hide. In the sense that CMOs are going to be under pressure from their boards, CFOs, and to prove that they're delivering value for money. For just they need solutions that they can take to the board, the CMOs. So actually, if you're the agency who's going proactively to the CMO with ideas about how to be more efficient, how to improve that ROI, the things that Tina was talking about in a proactive way, and also providing, I mean, I know you did some quick research among some CMOs, and one of the trends that came out of that was that they were looking for consumer insight. How are behaviours changing that both affects perhaps their go-to-market strategy, but also their tonality in communication. So don't sit back, don't pretend to, don't hide and think, I've got my retainer, I'm doing a good job. Let's hope it just flows over me and I don't get caught in the squeeze. Be proactive, because that's what the CMO is looking for. He's looking for solutions as much as you are in terms of how to take the business forward and work within the constraints that he might be being given from the board in terms of resources, both sort of physical and financial. So if you can be proactive in terms of this is what consumers are saying, this is what they're wanting from a brand like yours, and here's some ideas about doing things differently. Now that's always a bit of a challenge because the client might turn around and say, well, why haven't you done this before? But you can couch it in the sense of, look, the world's changed, things have moved on, there are changes in you can do it in a clever way to actually be proactive, be ideas and solution orientated, and don't sort of don't hold back on that, because you'll get the rewards.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned, I went out on Saturday actually and spoke to a quick poll of senior clients in various different organizations to ask what they wanted from their agencies. And just give me a second, I'll just kind of quote some of the feedback from them, because it's really relevant to what you're saying there. First is a very senior lady, a major MD of a major tour operator. And she said, you need to help us to see the wood from the trees, and feedback on consumer sentiment and insights is incredibly important. Help us stay focused on less is more. Every pound needs to work so much harder. Another head of marketing for a major credit card company, she said consumer insights, how people feeling, shopping, consumers, media, thinking about holidays, eating out, food delivery, etc. What other brands are doing is hugely relevant. So thinking about what messaging they're putting out in the context of where we are. And then this is a really important point, which is the balance in tone. We don't want to be all doom and gloom or tone deaf. And we equally don't want to put communications out there that's likely to offend or land wrongly. Another one from the CEO of a major hotel group, keep us grounded in consumer sentiment and how best to reflect this in our messaging. Managing director of a major insurance group, she said, keep an eye on what our competitors are doing through the line, seek to demonstrate the value of keeping the lights on. So yeah, when you're having those conversations with your CFO or your chief exec or MD, or if you're indeed on this call, I think there's plenty of really solid case histories to demonstrate the value in actually continuing to maintain your marketing spend through a period like this. But with little flexibility on variable costs, inevitably there's going to be some focus on this area. But as agencies and agency owners, it really is down to you to demonstrate the value add and demonstrate what is and what isn't effective, what's working and what needs to work together. And Tina was talking about kind of the shift towards digital because of accountability and because you could demonstrate the immediate impact. Reality is, as we all know, that's great if you're a well-established brand with strong brand credentials, and you have that halo from the brand to work well. If you don't, digital alone, unfortunately, just isn't going to cut the mustard. You're not going to be able to actually have that impact, because the other thing we see in recession is that brands, people take comfort from brands, and they tend to navigate back to brands that they know and they love and they're comfortable with, and they seek that reassurance, particularly at this moment in time. Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you, Simon, for teeing up that. That was great. I want to go back to risk and creativity, if I may, Adam, because now arguably isn't the time to be taking a risk, but actually I'm sure you'll probably make the argument for taking risk in a downturn.
Well, as business owners or marketers, the one thing we're very good at is balancing risk in or out of recession. So there's always a role for risk. And recession for me is the great test of how risk averse or risk tolerant we are. For marketers, risk is now about outcomes, which is what Tina was talking about. So your success rate for innovation needs to show a higher return in a downturn. And creativity is the same, whether you're an agency or a brand. If you're investing in creativity, you must be able to quantify a return. This becomes harder, but not impossible if you're a PR agency, for example. But any client I'm working with now is thinking on these terms. We've shifted away from an awareness marketing world to a performance world. One thing I will say is that we should take a global view. When Brexit happened, our UK business really suffered as a result of the exchange rate, but our US business was worth so much more. So how do we turn a negative into a positive? Is now the right time to develop into other markets?
Yeah, that's a fair shout. And obviously with the pound being where it's been the last few weeks, we're now a much more attractive proposition for particularly US entities wanting to do work with us, or indeed wanting to acquire us. So it'll be interesting to see actually as things progress, particularly into the new year, whether there's an increase in the number of M&A activities for North American organizations looking to pick up agencies on the cheap. Back to you, Cindy. You spoke earlier on about the need to communicate and the need to educate. I'm conscious that, you know, within the client organizations and also within agency organizations, there's a lot of young people who have been through a hell of a lot in the last few years. You know, they've had, as we all have, but particularly young people, if they entered the workplace, say 4 years ago, they've had a bit of a bumpy ride, to say the least. How do we help to educate them on expectations on a recession? Obviously, up till very recently, you know, they've been, particularly Gen Z and what have you, have been very, very focused on actually career progression, getting more money, getting training and development. Some of that stuff is going to be a little bit harder to support at the moment. Cindy, you're on mute again. I'm sorry. My fault.
You mute me and I forget to unmute myself. Sorry.
I'll do that. I'll do that.
You're gagging me, not me. Intentionally. No, I think one of the conversations actually we had, Stephen, which is about there's a bit of a benefit that this group haven't gone through a recession before, because actually they don't come with all the biases, you know, that have already that we have got, and aren't constrained by some of the history that we've got. So I think, you know, you were keen for us to have some positive messages here. So one of the positive messages is it's a positive that they haven't been through this, and I think what we need to be really aware of is that this is a group of people who are used to and like autonomy. They like autonomy and they like flexibility. And actually, if we're not careful, we because of where businesses are, they're going to revert back to what I call a command and control and a very hierarchical way of working, which will potentially stifle some of the involvement and innovation and ideas that can come from this group of people. So I would say that we need to be able to provide an environment which feels inclusive, involves them, you know, make it safe. Going back to Adam's point about risk, you need to be creating an environment where people feel it's safe to say, I don't understand, I'm worried about this, because you don't want that to blow up in your face 2 weeks later where the budget has gone through the floor and they didn't want to tell you. So you need to, you know, it needs to be safe enough that they can ask, get clarity. I don't understand, I haven't been here before. They raise concerns, but are really happy to come forward with half-baked ideas, because those half-baked ideas might be, you know, some of those great solutions, those great ideas for clients or cost base or something else. So I think it's about trying to maintain the environment that these individuals thrive in and not revert back to type because we're under pressure, because actually that will send them in the wrong direction. And actually what we'll do is we will silence them and we won't get the benefit of, you know, those brains, the lack of experience, but some of those ideas. So that would be my watch out for everyone.
No, I think that's a great suggestion. I think actually involving everybody in the solution so they feel that they're able, as you say, to talk up and come up with ideas, and engaging them around that is great. So I mean, let's be honest about it. What we're looking for at the moment is autocracy. We're not looking for top-down management to make decisions. We want people to actually work collaboratively and share ideas and come up with solutions that can actually enable growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tina, flip side of that, I mean, you must be getting pressure from clients that are wanting to look to reduce agency fees and looking to pitch their business accordingly. Is there an upturn in pitches at the moment?
Yes and no. I mean, those clients that are working in supply chain, so clients I've worked with, for example, Innocent, Ferrero Rocher, no free samples from either of them. They are looking at getting their budgets cut. I was talking to a procurement person who's working with General Mills, and they're saying about 20% cut. But what I have seen where there is good procurement, and I always preface that, there's a lot of us that are really great and there's some not so great, are really being open with their agencies. So my Ferrero client based in Luxembourg are having those conversations with their agencies to say, one thing that saddens me is almost like, do you remember years ago, it's like, oh, we've got a profit gap, take it out of marketing. And it seems to be the ones that are having supply chain costs, product, energy, transit, those of the, Brexit, for example, there's, this 20% cut, and where's it going to come from? But I think where they are engaging with their procurement teams, the good ones are saying, right, okay, what can we do? Let's look at the spec. Let's look at inefficiencies, and those that are agencies on the call will appreciate that they probably bake some time in for, client inefficiencies, briefings, a sign off. So I think there's good dialogue going on, where there are good relationships in place, and there's good procurement teams working with their great agencies and their clients. Again, getting back to the point about open, honest transparency. Is it leading to more pitches? No. And I think initiatives like obviously the Pitch Positive pledge that came out earlier in this year, I think there's probably a bit more of a profile on let's think before we pitch. And also we were there 2-3 years ago with COVID, where we shut down a lot of our agencies, and we've tried to re-engage with some of them and they've moved on, or they're being more selective. So I think clients are being more thoughtful about their agencies and the relationships with them. I think agencies are being more selective. Actually, I say no more, which, whilst it's annoying sometimes for us procurement people with running pitches, is great because they're standing up to clients, and are being more selective because they've got limited resource and things like mental health. We've got to focus on that. Obviously, that's really important. So I think, yes, to clients trying to get efficiencies from their budget, but what I've seen is still being respectful for current agency arrangements, honouring those, working with them, looking at things like ROI. And I haven't seen more pitching. I think it's about consolidating what we've got and being more respectful of the impact on our third-party agency relationships.
You touched there on the mental health, and it's something obviously that is top of both client and agency agendas at the moment. We've seen obviously from the COVID period that a lot of agencies are under-resourced. Some are between 10 and 20% below where they should be in terms of headcount. So there's a lot of pressure on the people in those organisations, and likewise too client marketing departments. Thinking about this partnership issue, and Adam's one for you here, what can we do on that mental health agenda collectively with both clients and agencies?
Oh, Christ, that's a big one. I mean, the one thing I will say is that mental health and well-being is not an efficiency. So, if there are budgets put aside for supporting your team, that, if anything, is going to help productivity, not hinder it. So that is not something that can go. That is something that needs to be implicit and part of the agency or business culture. And that needs to be represented at board level. I mean, typically when you're making efficiencies, it wouldn't be those areas. It would be marketing budgets, training and development budgets, or non-billable costs. Travel is a sensible thing to cut, especially because it has an impact on sustainability. And I like businesses that call that out, as it can work as a retention tool. And again, this is not a typical recession. We have a major talent gap. So not investing in training, for example, can create talent retention issues. And when I look at team utilization charts, you often see the more junior teams at full capacity. One area to look at is your underlying cost base and how top heavy you are, and whether some of those senior members of staff are performing. But slashing non-billable costs can be a false economy if it results in staff churn or even mental health issues. I've sat in board meetings where stakeholders have said, we need to protect the margin, cut this, cut that. And then 3 months later, you win a huge client and you're desperately trying to hire bodies. So the one thing I would say is don't do anything today that will cost you tomorrow.
Yeah, that's really sound advice. And we saw that, didn't we, where agencies cut back enormously, I think, during the COVID period, and they've really struggled to rehire as a consequence. And it wasn't just them, it was also brand side too. It does make for quite a difficult cocktail, doesn't it? Because, you know, in the past recessions, there has been a natural place to go to. You know, you reduce your overheads, both fixed overheads and variable overheads. You look to move your offices to smaller accommodation, but a lot of agencies now have done that. They did that in COVID. They probably, some of them don't have offices, they work remotely. They compete on level playing field with their global counterparts by dint of where we are and through technology. So they don't have capacity necessarily to actually reduce further overheads. So it's going to be a tricky one, isn't it? Simon, I mean, when you were, sorry, Adam, you come back to me on that.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, when I said before, focus on your strengths, this is something that independent agencies have, or smaller agencies have. Don't focus on what you lack, which might be scale or access to back office. The advantages outweigh the negatives. If you're an agency, you can be more flexible, more agile, lower cost, more bespoke in terms of client teams, more entrepreneurial, there's less red tape, you have more energy, more purpose. So the advice is always don't focus on your shortcomings, really focus on strengths and points of distinction.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's so much more difficult, I think, for the groups to be able to actually reflect on economic challenges than it is for the independents. So they've got so much more flexibility and their business models can be adjusted to accommodate their clients. So, you know, we've seen it before, you know, in times where independent agencies and consultants have actually done very, very well. Their cost base is lower and they can actually benefit from this. And from a client point of view, you're dealing with the owners rather than people who might be perhaps more junior. So there's lots of good reasons to be super positive, I think, for the independents.
Just on that, Stephen, I've seen procurement people actually going back to the big holding companies and saying, because we've got this impact on our budgets, actually, you know, we want less of those people, just more. I'm really not happy about it, you know, and having those conversations. So I totally agree. I am seeing the clients I work with and my procurement clients much more increased focus on the independent agency, that flexibility, and as you said, dealing with the agency owners, you know, the founders, you know, people, because they're fed up with going to, you know, a big agency that's got 4 levels of account management, 4 levels of planners, 4 levels of creativity, you know, and it's like, well, why am I paying for that, for example? So yeah, really, I think it's a really great time to be an independent agency, and as Adam said, to focus on that positive side of things.
So a couple more questions, if I may, and then I'd like to open it up to all of the lovely people who've joined us today. One of the things that we've spoken about is the need to obviously maintain that positive attitude. And we saw how creative agencies and brands were during COVID. Looking to the situation we have at the moment, I mean, one of the things that was very apparent during the COVID period is that people had time. They had time to be able to engage in conversations like this and attend events like this. As we kind of move into this other period in the economic cycle, maintaining that positive attitude and keeping that culture going, Cindy, obviously is essentially very, very important. You've touched on some of the techniques earlier on, but giving advice to both brand owners and to agencies, what do you believe they should be doing now at this particular moment in time with their people as we are on the 5th of October? And sorry, let me take you off mute because it's my turn. Oh, I'm muting you again.
You like. So I think that there are a number of things they can do, but before I go into what they should do, I just want to pull out just some watch points as well, which I think is really important. So going back to Adam's point, which is, I genuinely believe that culture is a source of competitive advantage if you manage it actively, and it can be a source for 2 reasons. It will help you recruit and retain talent, and it will enable you to optimize your performance. If you've got really healthy, strong culture where you've got people united behind a common cause, that cause might be, keeping close to clients, it might be bringing our cost base down, it might be maintaining our culture, but united, it will optimize your performance. But I think the watch out is, we know that culture essentially is behaviors, the way people behave and work together. And actually the behaviors are set, the culture is set by the leaders. And the leaders need to be absolutely self-aware about the impact that the recession is having on the way they're feeling and thinking, the stresses and the pressures, because it will shift. We say the culture is set by what the leaders talk about, what they spend their time doing, what they spend their money on, who they promote, people are watching that, and therefore the leaders need to ensure that actually during these times of pressure, they are not, they're not unintentionally shifting their focus, because the way that they manage redundancies, the way they manage tough decisions will affect the culture of the organization, and people will be watching. So first thing I think I would say to all leaders is be really self-aware on the impact this is having on you and how you're spending your time and what you're talking about. And you can do, I would also say that actually, and I think Alison Rose from RBS talks about this. She says everyone needs to be responsible for both the costs of the organization and the culture, and you need to track and measure it on a weekly basis, in the same way as what the client's doing. What is your cost base doing? How are people feeling? Is the culture, still open, transparent, inclusive? How am I feeling? And actually encourage each of the team members to be reporting back on that. So I think it needs active management, and going back to that safe environment, giving permission for people to say, this is feeling difficult now. This is changing. Actually, there's contradictions going on here. So it's that whole involvement thing, making everyone involved in shaping and maintaining and owning that culture, and making sure it's not going off course, because that will then essentially, undermine the strengths that we talked about earlier.
Thank you. Alan, do you want to say something there?
I just want to say that I feel so sorry for leaders at the moment. They are only human, believe it or not, and they are fallible. And this is a very hard time, and they've been experiencing the same traumas that we all have over the last 3 years. Good leadership is about time, money, process, focus, communication, and communication is so important. So you have to communicate with honesty and confidence, kindness and empathy. This is really the time where we need to see and hear from our leaders, and leaders can offer the wisdom of experience and can provide context and evidence. It's almost better to over-communicate during these times, but I also fear for leaders who are new to dealing with these issues. I can't recommend highly enough leaders creating their own support network where they can draw comfort in other people's experiences. I've seen culture dramatically reduce staff churn, but if that's the case, it can also go the other way. So, leaders really, this needs to be at the center of agency strategy. It should be discussed at board level. Owners must lead by example, and their actions or behaviors can't be incongruent with their words.
I'm going to be fairly controversial and say that absolutely, totally agree on all the points about culture, but you can't bank it, in the sense that actually, if you are a 30-year-old account manager in an agency or a brand manager client side, and like everyone else, you've seen the cost of living increases, and if you are struggling to be able to survive on a salary, culture aside, that's not going to be enough, is it?
It's also more nuanced. It's not binary. I don't think you have a good culture or a bad culture. You can have both. And my business had at times an amazing culture and at times a horrible culture. It can, as fast as it can improve, it can also go downhill. So you just have to keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll open up to questions if I may now. And Steve Hughes has asked a question, which I'm going to ask of you, if I may, Simon. Steve says, as one of the speakers suggested, marketing budgets are soft targets for board-initiated spending cuts. what's the best way to defend the marketing budget?
Well, the best way is that, well, there's a lot of research that shows that brands that keep communicating effectively through economic downturns tend to come out of it stronger. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't spend, you don't spend less, but you, as we talked about before, you might be doing things more efficiently and find more efficient ways to communicate. But if you can gain share of voice when other people are actually taking money out of the market and maintain your spend, lots of research shows that those brands come out faster and stronger as the recovery happens. So that's one, and there's lots of papers that people can refer to, IPA papers and things that demonstrate that if they want the arguments for that. And spend covers a whole range of things. I mean, as we've talked about, it's about being clever where you save money. It's about the efficiency rather than the spend. Protect the things that need protecting, and be ruthless with the things that are perhaps a little bit, tangential to the ones that are delivering real ROI. And be honest with yourself. Don't just stick to spending things that. I don't know, sacred cows in the business because they have been, if they're not delivering, and other things are delivering better. So you've got to be open as a marketeer within a brand to new ideas and to question within the business, what is really working and effective. So it's always tough. The toughest thing is when somebody comes along and says, right, it's 10% across the board. You've just got to find it. And of course, the marketing budget's potentially one of the bigger lumps of variable costs within the business anyway. So the focus is on you. But to a certain extent, it comes back to culture, and it comes back to the relationships you have with your agencies. We talked about the flexibility that owner sort of run marketing agencies in the independent sector have, and one of the advantages is that you can respond and be original, be innovative, and faster in reacting. So if you need to come up with a success sharing model, so there's a sort of greater risk and reward in terms of the impact of your marketing and things like that, being able to come up with those ideas early and quicker than perhaps some network agencies who've got to go through a long protracted process to get to those sorts of decisions, can put an independent agency in the front row, as it were.
Thank you, Simon.
I don't know whether that answers it, but no, I mean, there's some of the ideas. And also, I remember going back to the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and there are always opportunities in recession, as you said, Stephen, both on the agency side and on the brand side. And when the government put together I think it was euphemistically called, or in the press, cash for clunkers, where the government put £1,000 in, manufacturers had to put £1,000 in, and it was a way of getting older cars off the road. So it was pegged as an environmental thing to get the older, less environmentally, less clean sort of petrol and diesel cars off the road. Most manufacturers got into that, but actually the ones who really saw a bounce out of that were people like Kia and Hyundai, who had a value proposition, had some good products at that lower end, got habitual used cars owners into a new car, and actually from that point saw their market share grow dramatically sort of through the last decade, and are now both top 10 players in the UK market. Yeah, so there are opportunities for brands, coming out of recession, as you said, and so not. The other thing that I would say is that there is always a danger that you have a couple of, as an agency, you have a couple of clients who are really in the mire, they're in sectors that are really struggling, and you assume that all your clients are in that position. And you've got to be careful, because not all businesses are going to be affected in the same way by the downturn, depending on what sector they're in, which, as we talked about, different demographics are going to be affected differently. And so don't always go in assuming that every client's in the same position, because you might actually be sort of offering up cash that isn't needed in some senses, or you go in with the same attitude that everything's doom and gloom, with some clients who are going, no, for us, everything's fine. And, tonally, you've got to get it right with each of your clients.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Lauren, we'll come to you. You got a question?
Yes, I'm just curious to hear from the panel. I know we touched on this, the last recession webinar was about the sharp increase in salaries. And I'm just curious to know, kind of linking to what you just said, Simon, I wonder if that might be a trigger as a potential opportunities for consultancies stroke agencies where, we might cap or get rid of this increase in salaries, that, there might be a series of redundancies and then they might backfill that with possible agencies. I'm making an assumption here, but I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are of how this will change this sharp increase in salaries.
Adam, one for you and for Cindy.
Cindy?
Are you gagging me?
No, you're not gagged. You're ungagged.
Hi, Lauren. Hi, Lauren. So actually, I had I think we had this conversation with Stephen. So what we are finding as an advisory firm is that our clients are struggling. Actually, I know they're still struggling to fill the vacancies. They're still, although we're entering a recession, they're still struggling to find the talent, senior talent that they want. And they need that senior talent because it's business critical. It's, and so my firm is actually providing some support, internal support on, 2-3 days a week to support their senior teams in areas where they don't have the expertise and they don't have the specialism that they need. So we're actually benefiting big time by able, to field some key members of the team to support our clients. And actually, once they're in there, the great thing is that then we're generating more opportunities. So it's actually become a really good way of sourcing some, new business, organic new business, actually. So listening to your clients and understanding where the pressures are, and is it in that senior team, and thinking, actually, we can come and help, we could field someone. I think it's a really good strategy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good question. I'm not going to bring in Alfie. Let me just add you to the spotlight here, Alfie. And if you could, I meant to say, actually, when you come in, if you could just introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alfie. I'm the founder of Profit Spiral Consultancy Limited. I work with leaders and founders of small to medium-sized agencies, helping them to maximize profitability. And I also offer commercial finance training to their teams, helping them to be more commercially aware.
Brilliant, Alfie. Thank you. So what's your question, sir?
So my question is, at times like these, where it might be difficult for certain types of agencies, particularly the ones that aren't digital, to demonstrate their value, how would you recommend that they go about doing this, showing that value? Because the general consensus is, at times like these, is the agencies that aren't adding value or the least valuable to clients that get cut, their budgets get cut the quickest. So how would you recommend that agencies show that value add to clients at these times?
I can start that.
Let's take that one.
I can take that. I mean, I think it's a really good question, Alfie, and I think it depends on the definition of value, doesn't it? Because for different clients, it means different things. When I do pitches, I often ask for added value, but what is that? And actually, I did a pitch last year for Coke, and one network agency gave me a list of 40 value added up suggestions they'd had. Even working with the procurement guys, I didn't keep a copy of it. I should have done, because it was a really good list. And it's things I hadn't seen before. So, I'm used to seeing things like, access to senior management. When Steve and I worked together at SSE, actually, we really encourage the agencies that we've pitched and worked with to provide a big list of added value. And things like the media agency, we had access to their training academy, we had senior management workshops, go off site, twice a year, use of the offices, those of you people that have offices, London offices, teas and coffees. Those that know me always look at the teas and coffees and biscuits in an agency and the cost of that could be added value. So from that point of view, so great question, Alfie. I think there is so much value there, and I think a lot of agencies provide quite a lot of free stuff to clients and don't really put a value on it. Access to tech, access to panels. And actually, I encourage agencies, when I'm running pitches for clients, I encourage the agencies to say, put a value on that. You know, access to, or you've negotiated with that photographer, or you've done this, or you've looked at that print run. So actually get in that mindset and, in a way, be a procurement person as well, and actually look at what you're currently doing, but also what you're providing, probably a lot of time, press cuttings, you know, competitor reports, all that stuff that often agencies provide for free. Put a value on it. Will the client know that you said, oh, it's £10,000? Will they know that it's £10,000? So there's loads of stuff. And I think agencies are doing a lot of it already. They probably just need a bit of help from you to actually put a value on it and put it in the list and get that 40 list that this holding company did as well.
Thank you, Alfie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina, on that one. We've got time for one more question. Any questions of the panel? Anyone would like to ask a question of the panel? Just either raise your hand or come off mute and ask them directly. Okay. If not, I mean, I've got a couple of things I just wanted to discuss, which is clearly, you know, organisations like the Independent Alliance of Independent Agencies and Pimento and others, you know, we're here to both support the industry but also support our clients through this time. So any ideas you've got on what we can be doing better and what you would expect of associations and organisations, be it ISBAR, the Advertising Association, where we work with all of them collectively, please do let me know, and I'll ensure that we actually go back to each of those organisations and make sure they're aware of what sort of resources and help you're doing. And equally too, if you think you can contribute and actually have a point of view and want to get involved in supporting our communities, then please do let me know as we go forward. One thing I think will be, I guess, a challenge, which will be, I know agency leaders at the moment are really struggling with trying to get their people back into the office from any more than 2 or 3 days a week. Equally too, we're moving gradually to a 4-day week, and I wonder whether or not the very concept of the 4-day week is going to be put to one side in this period, or do agency owners feel that it's already with us? Anyone want to pick up on that, Adam?
Well, just to say that I don't think there's any. I don't think it's one size fits all. I don't think there's one answer to this question. I think every business has to look at their products and services, their culture, their values, their mission, their purpose, and they then have to apply the best working practices to that. They also have to think about their people, how they attract talent, how they retain talent, which might mean they have to make some pretty strong compromises. So again, very difficult time for agency leaders. They're being asked to be highly innovative without any manual. And, you know, I think we're going to see a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, and to that point, I think, you know, that makes it so much more important that over the next few months we can learn from each other and support each other, and, you know, and frankly talk through some of these strategies and approaches perhaps before you execute them. So with that in mind, next Wednesday at the same time we have St James's Place. They're going to be in the guise of senior partner Jeff Day. He'll be on the line discussing ways in which agency owners can adjust this new economy. So if you have time next Wednesday at 11 o'clock, Teresa's going to put in the chat box now the link to be able to register for that. Both brands and agencies are all welcome to that. Following week, we're back on the road with the 6 PM Club. This time we're in London on Thursday, October the 20th, with Growth Animals hosting us, and we'll be in the familiar surroundings of the Betchman Arms in St Pancras. Very nice watering hole. But before I go, I want to thank all of our panel, and of course all of you, for joining us today. If you go to our website, you can download a series of articles on recessionary marketing, as well as listen to our podcast and also see the event we did back in July. Today's session will be on the Pimento catch-up channel on YouTube. Just search Pimento Agency. And if you'd like to directly engage with any of today's presenters, or you'd like to talk to Pimento about that burning marketing brief or challenge that you have right now, however small or large, please do drop me a line at Stephen with a ph.knight@pimento.co.uk. And then there's a few or four references, which I think we've already put into the chat box, or we're going to the chat box now, on articles that you can actually read up on and find more information on really interesting case histories from brands that have been through this before. So I suppose the bottom line is it's about people, always has been. It's about maintaining that culture. It's about talking to your clients. It's about being empathetic. It's about thinking about actually how the content you create lands in its environment against the audiences you're targeting. And it's about being prudent and finding ways in which you can reduce your spend without cutting into the stuff that's the most important, and that is your people and your proposition and what you do day in, day out. So thanks once again. It's been a really robust conversation. It's all remained super positive, which is great, and not political.